There's a NASCAR racetrack outside St. Louis with this man's name on it. He's worth over $11 billion, more than Oprah Winfrey and Michael Jordan put together, and he owns the largest black-owned business in America. And I can bet on anything that most of the people watching this video have never heard of him. That's David Steward, and in 1981 he was awarded the Salesman of the Year while working in FedEx. So how did he turn it around from there? Let's unravel his story. Chapter 1. The $20 billion company hiding in Missouri. Let's start with the sheer size of what this man built, because it is genuinely absurd that it's all invisible to the public. The company is called Worldwide Technology. It's headquartered outside St. Louis, Missouri, not Silicon Valley, not New York, Missouri, and it pulls in around $20 billion a year in revenue. $20 billion. That makes it roughly the 19th largest private company in the entire United States, and by a comfortable margin the biggest black-owned business in America. It employs somewhere north of 12,000 people, and its client list is a who's who of everything: Apple, Microsoft, Citi, Verizon, plus more than 80 of the Fortune 100 companies. Oh, and the federal government. This company wires up courthouses, military bases, prisons, and schools. So let me ask the obvious question. How is it possible that a company doing $20 billion a year, employing 12,000 people, serving the Pentagon and Apple, is a company you cannot picture the logo of? Here's the answer, and it's the first thing you need to understand about David Steward. He built an empire in the plumbing. Not the app you tap, not the phone in your hand, the enormous, invisible, unglamorous machinery underneath all of it that makes the technology actually work. Nobody makes a documentary about network integration. They just quietly hand you $20 billion a year for it. And the man at the top of it, David Steward, is worth an estimated $11.4 billion. In 2024, Forbes named him the richest black person in America, ranked number 84 on the entire Forbes 400. Now hold that number next to a couple you already know. Michael Jordan, on that same list, was estimated at $3.5 billion. Oprah Winfrey, by most estimates, sits around $3 billion. Add those two icons together, and you get less than $7 billion. David Steward has them beat by a comfortable $4 billion, and he has never once been on a cereal box. But here's the detail that reframes this whole thing, and it's the reason this story is so much better than a normal billionaire story. Forbes has a self-made score, a 1 to 10 scale measuring how much of a fortune a person actually built from scratch. Steward scored a perfect 10. Out of 400 of the richest people in America, only about 25 people got that score. And to understand why he earned it, we have to go to a small farm in Clinton, Missouri, where a little boy's morning chores included emptying the chamber pots. Chapter 2. The Farm, the Ashes, and the Swimming Pool. David Lloyd Steward was born in Chicago in 1951, and when he was about 2 years old, the family packed up and moved to Clinton, Missouri, a small rural town where they bought a little farm and lived, in plain terms, in poverty. There were 10 of them, 8 kids. His mother Dorothy was a homemaker who went back to finish her own education. His father Harold worked as a mechanic, a janitor, and a trash collector, sometimes seemingly all at once because that's what it took. And David's list of childhood chores is one of those things that tells you more than any statistic could. He's described it himself: emptying the chamber pots, shaking down the ash in the potbelly stove and then spreading that ash on the driveway so the car could get traction, cleaning the barn, feeding the cows and the pigs, milking the cow and skimming the cream. That was before school. That was his normal. And then there's the other layer of it, which was Missouri in the 1950s and 60s. He has been extremely direct about this. In his words, he vividly remembers segregation, separate schools, sitting in the balcony at the movie theater, being barred from the public swimming pool. He said he literally lived on the other side of the railroad tracks. Let that sit for a second. The man who would grow up to be the richest black person in America was not allowed to swim in his own town's pool. But here's where his family did something that explains everything that comes later. Despite having almost nothing, when homeless people came to the Steward house looking for food, they got fed. Every time. Steward has said no one was ever turned away, and that watching that as a kid was the first time he saw faith in action. His parents were running a charity out of a house that could barely feed itself. And now, the moment that gives me chills. In 1967, David Steward, a teenager, was part of a small group of black high school students who integrated that same public swimming pool he'd been barred from. He was, at one point, the only black male in his entire high school class. So before he ever sold a thing, before there was a company or $1 billion or a racetrack with his name on it, this kid had already done the hardest thing he'd ever do: walk into a place that had told him he wasn't allowed and get in the water anyway. That's the whole personality, formed at 16. And it would get tested about a dozen more times before any of this worked. Speaking of the moments that forge how a person thinks under pressure, a lot of it comes down to how the brain performs when it matters. That's the idea behind an audio series called the Genius Switch. It's based on the neuroscience of the flow state, that mode where focus and creativity click at the same time. And the whole routine is just listening with headphones a few minutes a day. It's a one-time $39, less than a single online course, and it's backed by a 90-day money-back guarantee, so you can test it on yourself with nothing to lose. If you're watching on your TV, pause and scan the QR code on screen with your phone camera, or tap the first link in the description. Now, back to David Steward and the day everything changed. Chapter 3. The Empty Ice Bucket. Here's my favorite story in this entire video, and it's the hinge that the whole $11 billion empire swings on. But we have to walk up to it, because the walk-up matters. Steward graduated from Central Missouri State in 1973 with a business degree, and then his career did what a lot of careers do. It wobbled. He substitute taught. He worked for the Boy Scouts of America, where he sometimes went without a paycheck. He got a job as a production manager at a company called Wagner Electric, and then Wagner went out of business and laid him off. So far, not exactly a billionaire trajectory. Then in the mid-70s, he got into sales at the Missouri Pacific Railroad. And here's a detail worth pausing on. He was the first black person that company ever had selling rail services. First. In the 1970s. Which means his actual job was walking into rooms full of people who had never once done business with someone who looked like him, and closing deals anyway. That is a specific and brutal kind of professional difficulty, and he turned out to be exceptional at it. Then, in 1979, he jumped to Federal Express as a senior account executive. And at FedEx, David Steward was not just good. He was so great at his work that in 1981, they named him Salesman of the Year and put him in the company's Sales Hall of Fame. Now, the ceremony. They call his name, he goes up, and they hand him his trophy. And the trophy is a silver ice bucket with his initials engraved on it. Beautiful thing. Real recognition from a real company for genuinely being the best in the building. And David Steward looks down into that ice bucket, and it's empty. And something in his brain went click. Here is roughly how he's described it. On the day of the ceremony, he got this engraved silver ice bucket, and when he looked inside, he saw that it was empty. And he said that vision hit him, that there was an emptiness and a confinement to working for someone else. That's when he really started thinking about buying his own business. Think about the poetry of that for a second. The greatest salesman in the company gets handed a container with nothing in it. That is the deal, isn't it? You bring in all the value, and they hand you the shiny empty thing, and they keep what goes inside. Most people take the bucket home and put it on a shelf. David Steward took it home and decided to go fill it himself. So in 1984, he borrowed $2,000 from his father, the mechanic and janitor and trash collector, and bought himself a business. It was a freight bill auditing company. Exhilarating work where you comb through railroad invoices hunting for overcharges. Not glamorous, but it was his. And it taught him something that turned out to be worth billions. How to use technology to solve a boring business problem that big companies will pay enormous money to make go away. Remember that, because in 6 years, he'd bet everything on it. Chapter 4. The day they towed his car. In July of 1990, David Steward put up $250,000 and co-founded Worldwide Technology with a young guy named Jim Kavanaugh, a former Olympic soccer player, of all things, who left a steady job to come do this. And what they founded was not a tech empire. It was a reseller. They sold printers, computers, and telephone equipment. That's it. That's the beginning of the $20 billion company. And the first 3 years were an absolute bloodbath. Let me lay out just how bad it got, because this is the part where a normal story ends. The company's debt climbed to $3.5 million. They fell behind on a $1 million line of credit. The heating bill went unpaid. The trash bill went unpaid. Think about that. The son of a trash collector couldn't pay the trash bill. One of the three original co-founders looked around and left. And David Steward, the founder, went home without a paycheck over and over again. But, and this is the part he's proudest of, he never missed payroll for his employees. Not once. He paid everybody but himself. And then came 1993. A collection company rolled into the office parking lot to repossess his car, a 2-year-old Lincoln Continental. And it happened in broad daylight, in front of his own employees. He's actually named them, years later, in a company newsletter. People like Angie Densmore, Kathy Nobelach, Joe Koenig, the people whose livelihoods were riding on him. They watched the boss's car get hauled away, and Steward had to run after it, physically chase the car across the lot, because his briefcase was still in the trunk. Picture that scene, because it is one of the great images in American business. A 42-year-old man in a suit sprinting across his own parking lot after a tow truck, retrieving his own briefcase, while the staff he can't afford to disappoint watches through the window. Nobody in that parking lot thought they were looking at the future richest black man in America. And here's what he said about why he didn't quit. He said he believed what they were doing for their employees and customers was meaningful, and he had faith the company was capable of providing exceptional value. That's it. That's the whole strategy at the lowest point. The work matters. Keep going. His co-founder Kavanaugh put $15,000 of his own personal savings into the business at one point just to get a product to a customer on time. Two guys holding a company together with their own bank accounts and pure stubbornness. Which raises the question, what changed? How do you go from getting your Lincoln towed to $20 billion a year? The answer is a business model so unglamorous it's almost funny. Chapter 5. How a company that makes nothing makes $20 billion. Here's the mechanism, and once you see it, you'll never unsee it. Worldwide technology makes virtually nothing itself. No signature gadget, no software you'd recognize, no product with its logo on your desk. What it does instead is sit in the middle of an enormously expensive problem. Picture a giant bank, or a hospital system, or the US military. They need to buy, configure, test, install, and manage tens of thousands of pieces of technology, servers, routers, laptops, security systems, from dozens of different manufacturers, all of which have to work together perfectly, and none of which come with somebody to do that for you. That job is a nightmare. It is a genuine, budget-devouring, career-ending nightmare. So WWT does it. They take a cut on every single item sold, and then charge fees on top for the services around it. Consulting, testing, staging, configuration, warehousing, shipping. They operate millions of square feet of warehouse and integration space. They are, in the most literal sense, the world's most sophisticated middleman. And the beauty of this model is that they don't care which technology wins. New chip company takes over the market? Fine, they'll integrate that too. They're not betting on a product. They're selling the labor of making all products work together, and that demand only ever goes up. And there was one more accelerant, which is a genuinely important piece of this story. In the early days, the St. Louis office of the Small Business Administration approached WWT, a small minority-owned firm at the time, about serving government customers, and made introductions that helped land their first federal contracts. That's what a government program working correctly looks like. Not a handout, but a door being opened for a company that had already proved it could deliver. WWT walked through it and never stopped. Then watch the numbers climb, because the last decade is ridiculous. Around $9.3 billion in sales in 2016, $17 billion in 2023, $20 billion in 2024. That is not a company growing. That's a company compounding. And it's all still private. No stock market, no ticker symbol, no quarterly earnings call. Which is exactly why David Steward's fortune did something in 1 year that almost nobody's does. Chapter 6. The year. He added $4 billion. Let's talk about the actual money, because the trajectory here is wild even by billionaire standards. In 2022, Forbes estimated David Steward's net worth at around $6 billion. In 2023, $7.6 billion. In 2024, $11.4 billion. That's a jump of nearly 50% in a single year, and it means that in 12 months, this man added roughly $4 billion, which is more than Michael Jordan's entire net worth. He gained a whole Michael Jordan in a year at the age of 73, running a company most Americans can't name. And that's what pushed him past Robert F. Smith, the private equity titan who founded Vista Equity Partners and famously paid off the student debt of an entire Morehouse College graduating class. Smith had held the title of richest Black American for years. Forbes put him at $10.8 billion, ranked 88th, 4 spots behind Steward. 2 Black billionaires trading the top spot, both of whom built their own companies. And here's the sobering context. On the entire Forbes 400 that year, there were only 4 Black billionaires: Steward, Smith, Palantir's Alexander Karp, and Michael Jordan. 4 out of 400. 1% of the list. Now here's the part that makes David Steward genuinely strange as a billionaire. What do you think he does with it? Because if you've watched any of our other videos, you know the drill by now. The super yacht, the hypercar fleet, the Bugatti collection, the 20,000 square foot compound with the Shark Tank. Steward has essentially none of that. He's been married to his wife Thelma for around 50 years. He still lives in St. Louis, the city where he built the thing. His most famous quirk is that he's deeply, openly religious about business. He literally co-wrote a book called Doing Business by the Good Book, 52 business lessons drawn from the Bible. That's the flex. A guy worth $11 billion wrote a business book about scripture and stayed in Missouri. So if the money isn't going into toys, where is it going? Straight into the city that let him build there. And this is where the empire gets physical. Chapter 7. The man whose name is on the racetrack. If you drive just across the river from St. Louis into southwestern Illinois, you'll find a motorsports facility called Worldwide Technology Raceway. His company's name is on the building. And this isn't a vanity billboard. It's the only track in the nation that hosts races from all 3 of North America's top racing series, including the NASCAR Cup Series. He signed a second 5-year naming agreement to keep it going. And listen to how he explains why, because it isn't about marketing at all. Steward said that his family and the company see their commitment to the raceway as a way to serve the people of St. Louis and southwestern Illinois with world-class motorsports, and that they see the investment as key to the long-term benefit and growth of the region. Local civic leaders describe the Raceway partnership as a vehicle for exposing kids to science and technology and driving workforce development in underinvested neighborhoods. So the racetrack is real infrastructure, a NASCAR venue functioning as a STEM pipeline. And that's one piece. He's also a minority owner of the St. Louis Blues, the city's NHL franchise. His company is a founding partner of St. Louis City SC, the city's Major League Soccer club. And the detail there is genuinely moving. WWT sponsors an entrance at the stadium, now called the Worldwide Technology Gate. They specifically chose the southwest corner gate, and the stated reason is what gets me. That gate sits right beside a permanent art installation called Pillars of the Valley, which memorializes the historic Black Mill Creek Valley neighborhood that was demolished decades ago. Of all the gates they could have branded, they picked the one standing next to a monument to a Black community that got erased. That's not sponsorship, that's a statement. Then there's the money that goes where cameras don't. In 2018, he gave $1.3 million to the University of Missouri-St. Louis to create the David and Thelma Steward Institute for Jazz Studies, named for himself and his wife, funding the study of Black American music. He's supported small local nonprofits, the kind that never make headlines. And the board list is almost comically long. Civic Progress of St. Louis, the St. Louis Regional Chamber, the United Way of Greater St. Louis, the St. Louis Science Center, BJC Health System, Webster University, Harris-Stowe State University, the Boy Scouts. This is a man who joined every committee in his city. Which brings us to what he's actually built beyond the company. And it turns out the Stewards have been quietly collecting Oscar nominations. Chapter 8. The bucket filled. So step back and look at the whole thing, because the last piece of this empire isn't a company at all. It's his kids. His daughter, Kimberly Steward, runs her own film company and was a producer on the movie Manchester by the Sea, which means she was in the room as a Best Picture nominee at the Academy Awards. His son, David Steward II, runs a Black-owned digital animation studio, and it's been credited on Oscar-recognized animated work. Sit with that generational leap for 1 second. The grandfather emptied chamber pots on a Missouri farm and collected trash for a living. The father was barred from the town's swimming pool, integrated it, and became the richest black man in America. The grandchildren are getting nominated for Academy Awards. 3 generations from a potbelly stove to the Oscars. And it all traces back to that empty ice bucket. Because here's the thing about the story David Steward tells about himself. He doesn't tell you about the $20 billion revenue or the Forbes ranking. He tells you about the trophy with nothing in it. He was the best salesman in one of the best companies in America, and the reward for being the best was a beautiful empty container. A perfect little metaphor for spending your life making somebody else rich. 9 years after that ceremony, he was chasing his own repossessed Lincoln across a parking lot, which is the universe's way of asking whether you really meant it. He did. He never missed a payroll for the people who stayed. And 30 years after that, he sat at the top of a list of 400 of the richest people in America, one of only 25 of them who built it from genuinely nothing. That's the whole lesson, and it's a better one than get rich. Ownership isn't about the trophy. It's about who keeps what goes inside the trophy. David Steward figured that out while holding a silver ice bucket at a company banquet in 1981, and he spent the next 43 years filling it. With a company, with 12,000 jobs, with a racetrack, with a jazz institute, with a stadium gate standing next to a memorial for a neighborhood somebody else tore down. The richest black man in America is a farm kid from Clinton, Missouri, who wasn't allowed in the pool. And now his name is on the building. If stories about how the biggest names turn nothing into empires they actually own are what brought you here, subscribe to Black Status and we'll keep delivering them. See you in the next one.